Welcome everyone to today's webcast, the 12th in our series, Creating Knowledge Workers for the Greener Product Marketplace. I'm Terry Swack, the founder and CEO of Sustainable Minds, and I'm thrilled to have our special guests with us today in this part 12 of this long-running series that we started in 2012 and now have had close to 35 educators from as many or more schools who have been teaching with Sustainable Minds in business, design, and engineering curriculum around the world. The frame for this webcast series, Creating Knowledge Workers for the Greener Product Marketplace, is ultimately, it's all about creating jobs. That's what education is partially dedicated to, is educating folks to come out to take jobs in our economy that drive change. And so schools who want to attract the kind of students who want to learn the skills to create that change will attract those kinds of students to meet the industry demand. And the manufacturers and businesses who want to be those businesses that lead in the marketplace in creating change will recruit students out of those schools. So this is all about educating and in large part upskilling, reskilling and upskilling both educators and returning students to the to get advanced degrees or executive training to bring these skills back out into the marketplace. So we're pretty excited to be able to say that since we introduced Sustainable Minds Eco-concept and LCA software for the intent of educating all kinds of people who make decisions about products to think from a life cycle perspective, we've had industry and educational institutions around the world using Sustainable Minds in various kinds of projects and curriculum. So today, we're really thrilled to have Anne-Marie Thomas from the University of St. Thomas and Nathan Shedroff from California College of the Arts. And what's really interesting about pairing these two presenters today is they both are bringing a very differentiated and creative perspective to what they teach already and are imbuing that perspective and that creativity in the way that they're integrating life cycle thinking into the curriculum that they've already been teaching. Anne-Marie has just gotten started teaching with Sustainable Minds, and so she's going to talk about her first semester, her first course, how she's integrated using the software and the project that she taught with. And then we'll kind of fast forward to Nathan, who's been using Sustainable Minds in his curriculum for 7 or 8 years. And so you can see both the development of the educator and the development of the curriculum and the students' abilities to really kind of take the ball and run with it. And that, to me, represents what we've tried to do the last 5 years since we started this webcast series, was to demonstrate to educators that you can get started teaching and integrating life cycle thinking and LCA into your curriculum, even if you've never done it before, because everybody is on the same learning curve. You bring your own background and interests and knowledge to the table and just get started. So a little bit about Sustainable Minds. We're a mission-based company, and our mission is to operationalize environmental performance into product development and manufacturing for the purposes of driving revenue and growth through greener product innovation. Now, that's a big mouthful, but we've always believed that to really make enduring change in the world, this has to be operationalized into the way people think and act. And so we've provided both a framework for thinking and tools for taking action. And the formula is teaching people to think differently, so lifecycle thinking, also known as eco-design, and giving them tools to measure. So when you think differently and you measure, you're going to get credibly greener results. And we like to make the contrast that you can teach people to think differently, but if they don't measure, you don't know if your thinking differently is creating meaningful improvements or creating impacts that wouldn't otherwise have existed in other areas that you wouldn't know about. So you think differently and you measure. And conversely, if you only were taught to measure and not think differently, you're likely then to have mostly incremental improvements because you're not envisioning a new way of approaching the problem or generating new kinds of solutions. So the real innovation happens in the teaching people to think differently. And I think you're going to see that in spades in both presentations today. You know, the ability to measure is a tool that's a necessary one to be able to evaluate the new way of thinking, to be able to make comparative decisions and appropriate trade-offs alongside all of the other kinds of decisions that get made when designing and manufacturing products. Now, early on, we decided that we didn't really like to talk about environmental impact because that's a negative. And to get people in product design and manufacturing interested in adding this new criteria for product development that sits alongside functional performance, cost, aesthetics, safety, we turned it around and said, let's talk about environmental performance. So it sits alongside functional performance, and now we have environmental performance. It's a positive. And people like to measure performance. And so with that frame, we can look at all of these other kinds of criteria that people have designed for. They know how to measure. They have ways of making trade-offs. And now we're providing them ways of thinking, tools, and the ability to make trade-offs now around environmental performance as this newest criteria. And there's a lot of market drivers that are really bringing and have brought environmental performance to the forefront in product development. The cost and competition for natural resources, regulation around the world, supply chain risk, needing to know and be responsible for the ingredients that get put in products. But the real opportunity for operationalizing environmental performance is to drive new product innovation and ultimately the new customers and revenues that come from innovation. And most importantly, the ability to really enhance a brand, to be forward-thinking, innovative, and a leader in all criteria for product development. And when you use environmental performance as an innovation driver, it ultimately should lower costs of manufacturing or lower costs somewhere in the life cycle and increase revenue. So companies making it a goal to operationalize environmental performance will achieve a competitive advantage. And to do that, it requires new knowledge, new processes, and new tools. And we like to go further and say, you know, now not only do manufacturers need and want to design greener products, if they're actually doing that, then they want to be able to market those greener products too. And so both the design and the marketing stories are continuous improvement loops, so that when you actually are, as a manufacturer, making improvements and changes in your products, you've got meaningful and credible stories to tell in the marketplace, and they all contribute to brand building and creation. Now, when we created Sustainable Minds software, we were the first to take lifecycle assessment and simplify it and deliver it in a cloud-based tool to be used by product development teams in the earliest stages of concept development, to be able to run scenarios, explore innovative ideas, and make trade-offs before it becomes too costly to do so. And so it turns out that, like anything else, when you make decisions in detailed design after concept design is done, it's very costly because you've already set things in motion. And it turns out that those decisions about environmental performance, such as decisions about materials, energy requirements, recyclability, the lifetime of the product, those need to be made in early stage design, because once you get into detailed design, making changes on any of those criteria are very costly. So the ability to be able to make those kinds of trade-offs, informed trade-offs early on, is very powerful and very valuable. And further, we introduce, and maybe it's not so new anymore, but when we introduced Sustainable Minds in 2009, we had this challenge of redefining what product lifecycle management meant in manufacturing, because the norm was really cradle to gate. But now introducing this much more expanded definition of product lifecycle from raw material acquisition through end of life and every stage in between, as well as including transportation and distribution between each of those stages. And so now that the manufacturer is responsible for the product across all of those life cycle stages, that's when we layer in the eco-design strategy or the life cycle thinking, because it turns out that when you break it down into a model of life cycle stages, there are strategies that can be applied in each of those life cycle stages to improve the performance, improve the environmental performance, i.e. reduce the impacts in each and every one of those stages. And so using this framework can be used to drive innovation. It can also be used as an analysis tool. So you can look at products that are doing well in the marketplace or being brought to the market and marketed as higher performing, and you can refer to the strategy wheel to kind of unbundle what it is that they did to make that higher performing product. And it turns out that the greatest innovation happens when multiple strategies from multiple life cycle stages are used, because that's not something that's obvious. So when you bring those new insights together to create something new, that by definition is innovation. Now here's the measurement part for those of you not familiar with life cycle assessment. It's both an objective and a quantified and comprehensive method for looking at the impacts of a product system. And it really is like any other investigative method, where you start by setting the scope and goal, you put in all the ingredients like a recipe or building a model, and then you apply the methodology and look at the results, interpret those results, and then go back, work on the model, run the assessment again, look at the results, and it's an iterative cycle. Now, because we introduced life cycle assessment into product development, we tried to merge terminology from both of those sectors. And this is the kind of geekiest slide in the presentation that explains how a bill of materials, so a manufacturing or engineering term, can be translated into environmental impacts using life cycle assessment. So we coined this term the system bill of materials. So it's the whole product system across all the life cycle stages. So all of those inputs can be interpreted into chemical data. And all of this chemical data, when put through the lens of a life cycle assessment methodology, can be attributed to one or more categories of impact. And each of those impact categories can be attributed to one or more types of damage, either to human health or to the built or natural environment. So to make the life cycle assessment methodology simple and understandable, we started with Tracy, the methodology from the EPA that measures environmental impacts in North America, and applying a normalization strategy created by folks at NIST and a weighting. We combine all of the impacts from these 10 impact categories into a single figure score, which we measure in a unit called a millipoint. And a millipoint is a relative value. It only has meaning when compared to another millipoint. But we also do is pull out the carbon equivalence. So that's the global warming score, and provide that in carbon equivalence, which is an actual value. And so users using Sustainable Minds can look at the overall impacts from all the impact categories, as well as the carbon footprint. And we've also made it possible for folks to model with the data that you need. If you don't see the data that comes in our already extensive database of inputs across the life cycle stages, you can request data be added. You can use the data browser to see if it's there. But the bottom line is, we try to teach that there is no such thing as a green product, that green is a relative value. Something can only be greener than something else. Something can only have better performance than something else. So it's all about comparisons. So early in the days when we were marketing Sustainable Minds, we had a sales VP who said, let's just tell people we're selling comparisons. That's what we're selling, comparisons. And in fact, that is ultimately the value of how to use Sustainable Minds, is by being able to iterate and evaluate comparative studies. And so in this concepts tab, the most meaningful value in an iterative cycle is to look at the impact improvement in the millipoint and the carbon footprint, or the lack of improvement. And this allows a user to pretty quickly make decisions about the eco design strategies they're using with real-time LCA results. So Sustainable Minds not only is software and data, it enables collaboration. It delivers with an extensive learning center that's the equivalent of about a 150-page textbook on eco-design and LCA. And specifically, the use case, again, is to benchmark and compare existing products or new product concepts to get quantified estimates of environmental performance. It's for non-experts. It's a standardized system, and it's easy to interpret and share results. And like I said, it comes with this extensive learning center that educators can not only draw from, but use as the kind of the go-to source for the background knowledge for this work. So with that, having set the stage on how the software works and how it was created, I'd like to introduce Anne-Marie, who will talk to you about how she has started to use Sustainable Minds, and we'll pass it to Nathan. And anytime you have questions along the way, please feel free to put them into the questions panel. We'll either take them as they arrive, but we'll have time at the end for some discussion. And Anne-Marie, I'm going to ask you to take it away.
Great, thank you. And to reiterate, I'd be happy to answer questions. So I've got that window open as well. So hello, I'm Anne-Marie Thomas. And as Terry mentioned, I teach at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, not the islands. And I have a sort of an interesting position. I'm in a combination position between the School of Engineering and the School of Business. And so for a little background on me, at St. Thomas, I run a lab on play and learning. So this includes things like developing squishy circuits, which is a way to use conductive and non-conductive Play-Doh to sculpt circuitry, or collaborating with dancers or musicians, and looking at ways we can cause an audience and we can cause a classroom to think differently about the material that they're trying to engage with. So our work really runs the gamut, everything from advising a Michelin 3-star restaurant on one of their projects dealing with food ingredients to working with a singing group to create visuals for their tour next year. My background personally is that I studied ocean engineering at MIT as an undergraduate, always fascinated by all things underwater, really interested in robotics, but wanted to teach. So went to California and did a PhD in mechanical engineering. And then while I was doing the PhD, spent some time at Art Center College of Design. I was at Caltech and spent some time at Art Center where I was studying product design. I was working with designers and really found that I appreciated that aspect, bringing not just the engineering to the work, but also bringing a much more global, holistic approach, which is I saw more of the designers learning. I moved to Minnesota shortly after and took an engineering position in 2006 here at the university, and have really been the design instructor for the university. I teach the engineering graphics course. I teach the classes on machine design. But one thing that was nagging at me for the first couple of years of teaching this was that I was teaching how to build things and talking a bit about why we build things, but didn't really feel like I was covering the environmental impact of the designs and the work the way I wanted to. We're a mission-driven school that really focuses on thinking critically and acting wisely for the common good. And I thought it would be bordering on irresponsible not to invest more time in the first year engineering design class looking at environmental sustainability. And I didn't think that I had the background to do that in a way that I was comfortable with. So as Terry spoke about upskilling and reskilling instructors, I actually went back to school in around 2009 and went to MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which had just started a certificate program in sustainable design. And I went through the certificate program there, and one of the tools that we used was Sustainable Minds. So I actually came to Sustainable Minds not as an instructor, but as a student who was assigned it for projects. And I really appreciated being able to look at so many aspects of the system, looking at things like transportation impact, looking at things like the material impacts. And that stayed at the back of my mind as I was teaching my engineering design classes. Unfortunately, there really wasn't time in the engineering first course to incorporate much beyond a cursory discussion of this. So the university let me create a new course that was taught for the first time last spring and the second time this spring, called Environmental Sustainability and Innovation. And it's a unique course in that it's designed for undergraduates in either the School of Engineering or the School of Business. And it is a broad overview of environmental sustainability with an emphasis on metrics and database decision making, particularly for new ventures. So having engineers and entrepreneurship students working together to create new business ideas. One thing that surprised me was that for many of these students, this was really the first exposure to these topics. So I was really going in with students who had little preparation to dive right into scientific analysis of impacts. None of the students, either last spring or this spring, had ever used LCA before, lifecycle analysis software. The majority of the students had minimal or no prior education in environmental impact. And the course had no mathematics or science prerequisites. So this posed a really interesting challenge for me as an instructor of I wanted them to meaningfully engage with the information and not just do cursory kind of greenwashing of things and saying if we recycle it'll be better. I wanted them to really look at the impacts, but I wanted a tool that would let them do it in a quantifiable way. And this is where Sustainable Minds came in. We started really small. We tested it last spring, and I just finished last week our Sustainable Minds unit, where this is really testing the waters for this. We did 2 100-minute long sessions dedicated to life cycle analysis and a 1-week-long homework assignment. And it can be a bit daunting when you're doing this for the first time to figure out a project. And this is, for me, one of the nice things is the Sustainable Minds in their Learning Center has, I believe it's 4 different projects, redesign projects, that already have all the information there. They've already done the bill of materials and given information that the students can then figure out how to incorporate into a Sustainable Minds audit of the design. So we did the very first one that they have, which is the toaster project, where we look at a toaster and we try to redesign it to reduce its carbon dioxide footprint, as well as other metrics. And for me, probably the most interesting part that I stress with my students, again, very varied science backgrounds. Some have one science class in college, some have engineering degrees, was the issue of saying something is metal or something is plastic really isn't specific enough if you want to figure out what the impacts are. So what you're looking at is a screenshot of them entering in information that they were given. They were told that there was 0.3 pounds of copper wire in it. But then the students would have to go into Sustainable Minds and look up what they were using. And in this case, this is the bill of materials for a redesigned toaster that this pair of students did. And you can see that Sustainable Minds lets them type in comments. And to me, this is possibly the most powerful thing, is when they said, okay, we want to reduce the impact of the copper. Can we use copper, secondary copper? These students aren't material scientists. So the fact that they can now ask themselves, well, in their own words, is this possibly dangerous? Is this inefficient in conducting electricity or heat? And it makes them think about this really tangibly of, who do we need to talk to? Should we go talk to an electrical engineer? Similarly, when they wanted to change the steel base to a secondary source, a recycled source, they had to ask themselves whether the heat transfer properties would be changed, which really mattered for a toaster. And you can see they made a lot of assumptions, and really getting the students to think of things not just as plastic or metal or that solid toaster, but seeing all these things that are inside of it and actually how little they know in some cases. I was really hoping to encourage questions. Once they'd done that one, they were given a longer assignment. Also, this is one that I used directly from Sustainable Minds. I used their information and their problem statement as provided, where the students were given information on a diaper, and they were asked to complete an assessment on the current diaper design using Sustainable Minds to look at impacts on things like human health and carbon footprint. And then working in pairs, ideally a pair that was one business and one engineering student, develop at least one new design which reduces the CO2 footprint of the diaper. And then each of the students pairs would write up a report discussing what changes they made, why they made those changes, and then a discussion of the assumptions they made. And again, what really fascinated me is we could get a pretty picture like this where the students, their results did show a greatly reduced carbon footprint, but they also noticed that other things changed. So for example, this is a quote from the student, and she said, she's a business student, she said, well, even though we decreased the carbon dioxide, it increased the carcinogens, which is worse. And this became a really meaningful class discussion of students with a variety of backgrounds saying, okay, well, if we change one thing, what else did we change in the system? And I had previously done in my engineering design class, it doesn't go as deep, we do life cycles of products, but we don't use any software for it. And I have to admit that the results that we got using this package in Sustainable Minds was a lot more detailed in the questions. The students engaged with it more because they couldn't hand wave. They had to pick an exact material, not just a better copper or a better plastic. They had to really think about what that impact would be when they switched it. And this is a great question. If we decrease the CO2, but we increase the carcinogens, have we made things worse? This is for babies. And this led into a long discussion with these students. So what I noticed as an instructor was that my students really engaged with it more, and they increased their awareness of the complexity involved in design and manufacturing. They couldn't hand wave. They really had to be exact, be specific, and if they couldn't answer something, they had to note that. They asked much deeper questions. As they're going through Sustainable Minds looking for a material they're replacing, they might see a different one. And I suddenly saw lots of students using their laptops in the classroom to do materials research and trying to figure out which professor they should go talk to understand if this would actually work the way they wanted it to. They were definitely motivated to do this additional research. And then finally, there was a gained appreciation for how difficult the process truly is and how many different expertise areas must be brought to the table. And for me, in an elective like this that has students from a variety of majors, that was one of my key goals, was to show them that there's a lot of different variables at play, and this is a really complex problem. And instead of that just being a depressing and nerve-wracking statement, hopefully it shows them that there are so many variables that they can look at and they can make an impact by changing one of them in some cases. So hopefully giving them a little spark of empowerment that this is something that they can actually use. I asked the students to write me anonymous questions about what they thought of using this process, and at least two of them wrote, why doesn't every company do this with every product? So if tomorrow's business leaders and engineers can think like that, to me as a parent, I'm feeling a little better about the world that my two young daughters will grow up in. So overall, that was, as I mentioned, this was the simply dipping my toes in. So two runs of the class simply doing this pre-given projects from Sustainable Minds. well, what's next? Well, I'm hoping that we increase the level of autonomy next year on the project and really have students pick their own subjects for LCA analysis, ideally incorporating this into the final business concept project that they do in the course in teams, and really diving in much deeper than they have in the past. It also, frankly, the more I use this and the student response I'm getting is really how do we now bring a tool like this and how do we use sustainable minds in our introductory engineering design classes so from day one we have this nice quantified appreciation of life cycle assessment. And I'm hoping that eventually we get so good at this in our classes that we can go to the level that Nathan's going to talk about in his work at CCA.
That was great. It's always fascinating to me to see how other programs and how other faculty are using this program. Thank you very much. I'm going to dive right in and really quickly cover myself. I have an industrial design background. I actually am a car designer by training, but I went into the interaction and information design fields and then grew up in those fields and moved more and more into brand design and business design. And I had always been an educator along the side. I've taught in business and design programs, in school programs like Stanford and in UC Berkeley, and then of course at CCA where I am mainly teaching, but I do a lot of international workshops as well. About 10 years ago now, 11 years ago, I went back to school myself. I went to a school called Presidio Graduate School and got an MBA in sustainable management. At the time, it was the only accredited degree in sustainability because I knew that sustainability was the future of design and business was the future of design and sustainable business was the future of business. So I sort of did the double hop, not knowing where it was going to take me, and it opened up an entirely new world to me. I do think that moving forward in the future, we cannot ignore business, design, engineering, cannot ignore sustainable impacts, be they on the ecological side, the social or cultural side, or even on the financial side. And so it's critical to me, it's critical to the programs here at CCA that every designer should know the principles, the strategies for making products better, the tools, the best in practice tools, even some of the frameworks. And I believe that everybody in the world, especially in the Western world, should have some familiarity with these too, because we all buy products and we all use stuff out there. We make a lot of decisions day to day in our lives that have a huge impact. So moving forward a little bit about the school. So I teach in two different programs. I started an MBA, Design MBA program, and I've taught there for 9 years. I think this is actually our 10th year using Sustainable Mind. And now I've gone back and I teach in the Industrial Design program at the undergrad level. So my information today is going to be a little bit of a mix between both of those. ID programs, one of 6 undergrad design programs. And this school, California College of the Arts, is 111 years old this year. And the values of the school go all the way back to the beginning when sustainability wasn't the word. It was ecology or social justice, et cetera. And we've always had a very classic ID program. And we've added sustainability and entrepreneurship and a couple things along the way, which was a very different experience than starting the MBA in design strategy, where I had a blank slate and got to integrate sustainability right into the curriculum at its core and got to impact every single class in the program. So we think of the MBA as sort of the 21st, a business degree for the 21st century, because it's so integrated with all these values. We get students from all over the world in both the grad and the undergrad. And like I said, sustainability is a core value in the school as a whole. So that's great because there's a lot of support for this. The course I'm going to be talking about mostly today is the undergraduate industrial design class, ID4 Studio. It's a studio class that happens in the junior year. And it combines both sustainability in terms of ecological impacts as well as the social, cultural, and economic impacts, because those are just as important to balance. We give them a really core understanding of sustainability principles and systems thinking. We introduce them a little bit to frameworks, although most people don't really need to know the sustainability frameworks. And then we spend a lot of time on giving them access to tools and talking about the strategies for making products and services better. We give them 2 projects within this course. The first project is a product evaluation project. So we have them go out and get physical products. They can buy them used or broken as long as all the pieces are there. They can get them new if they're cheap, but they destroy them. They pull them apart and use the Sustainable Minds LCA tool to evaluate them from the ecological perspective. That's not enough for us. And so we introduce some other frameworks and have them also, alongside this, evaluate their products from a social, cultural, and financial aspect as well. Unfortunately, the tools for measuring those impacts just don't really exist, not to the level that Sustainable Minds and LCA tools exist for the ecological impact. So we have a lot of development we need to do in shoring up those other categories of sustainability. Okay, so let's see some of the work that the students do. So they choose a physical product and they use Sustainable Minds to evaluate it from the ecological side. We also don't give them any instruction, which is probably a little bit unusual. We don't do any kind of training. Obviously, there's training materials on the Sustainable Minds site. We just give them access to the tool. We buy them subscriptions and let them go. If they have trouble, we can, come in and help them use the tool or help them find things. But by and large, they find their way really easily through Sustainable Minds. Sometimes they have trouble finding where a particular material is listed, etc. Here's an example of a team from last semester that pulled apart a smartphone. They went out and bought a smartphone. Luckily, it was a really cheap phone. Pulled it apart, examined all of the pieces, identified the materials as best they could, and then listed it in Sustainable Minds to get the ecological impact. In this case, the team also chose a framework called natural capitalism to look at the other aspects of this product's impact. So I don't have to go into this a great deal, but it's important to us to make sure that they're getting a full perspective on the sustainability and the impacts of products, not just an ecological one or not just a social one or a financial one, et cetera. And all the student teams end up using a variety of different frameworks. So here's the work that our team did in this case. This is the output from the LCA from Sustainable Minds, and you can see, of course, the impacts and where they are. They look at, and we require them to look at impacts from a lot of different perspectives. So they get the impacts and think about them from the impact category, whether it's acidification or carcinogens, et cetera. We also want them to look at the impacts by life cycle stage. And then we also want to look at, and in fact, one of the most important things for a product designer, industrial designer, is to see which parts are creating which kinds of impacts. So here's another team. This is actually from this semester. They completed this just a few weeks ago. And it's, I believe, a Norelco electric shaver. So here's all the parts. They categorized all these. They also look at the packaging. We try to make them consider all aspects of a consumer product in this case. And then they start listing and weighing into the Sustainable Minds tool. Now, their hardest part here, the biggest challenge for them is identifying a lot of the parts materials. They have to make some guesses in places. This actually gets them out to other parts of the school, like going up to the shop and talking to some of the experts up there, or going back to some of their materials courses and asking instructors, what kind of plastic is this, or is this plastic at all, and what about this rubber, et cetera. So one of the nice things is that it sort of moves them out into the rest of the community to go get information. We also ask them to try to contact the companies, talk to engineers at the company, talk to really anyone they can find at the company, and usually that doesn't go very well because either they can't get a hold of anyone at all, or they get a hold of someone and the company's party line is basically, yeah, we're not gonna, we don't want to talk about that. My guess is that mostly companies do that not because they just want to be difficult or that they're worried about liabilities. It's mostly because they don't have this information themselves. As Anne-Marie said, her students are asking, why don't more companies do this? And I have the same question. The fact is that most companies aren't looking at the products from this perspective, so they don't have the information to share with our students anyway. But it's a good lesson for our students to learn. So here are the Norelco razor. We see where the impact categories are, a lot of ecotoxicity. And then on the right-hand side, here's two of the biggest parts that have the biggest impact. No surprise to anyone that's ever done an LCA for consumer products, the battery and the circuit board. And this is a revelation to product designers because, they go into this project thinking, oh, maybe if we make the case out of bamboo or some kind of eco-plastic, I can increase the performance in an ecological standpoint or perspective. And then they come up against the facts and find out that, no, the metals, electronics, the battery have such a huge impact, and it's a little bit demoralizing to product designers, that what's left for them to have an impact really is a slim margin. And it both depresses them and sort of motivates them together. So here's just one other comparison. This is looking just at the packaging as a category. And they find out that just because a product might weigh more than another, a part may weigh more than another part, or it might be a bigger piece, for instance, doesn't mean that its impact is corresponding with the mass of the part itself. So that it really ends up making them focus down on what the materials are and what the performance of those materials are. So these different perspectives that they get through the LCA product at Sustainable Minds are really helpful for them to really understand what's going on with the product. In this case, this team also did a comparison with a throwaway shaver because they knew that just because something has big impact doesn't mean that it's worse. That in terms of use, especially with something like a shaver that you use every day or every couple of days, they wanted to know when the shaver sort of paid for itself in comparison to a throwaway razor. And this is exactly the comparison between the two products. What they found out is that I think it was right around, I think it was like 600 times if you used a throwaway razor 600 times, it would finally have a bit greater impact than if you used the electric shaver 600 times. I don't really remember the exact number, but this is important to them understanding comparisons, not just within the same product category, but in similar use cases in terms of service, getting the same thing done. Oh, here it is. It's 576, so I was close with 600. So this kind of comparison is gold for them because it really gives them a deep understanding of what the impacts are, at least on the ecological side, for the things that they're looking at, the things that they use. In this case, they also did analysis and evaluation using the living principles, which is a scorecard that comes out of the, and a framework that comes out of the AIGA. We have our own scorecard, which is what you see on this screen here, that they then use throughout the rest of their courses here at CCA. We require them to not just do this in this course, but then to be, we try to support and reinforce these principles and these processes throughout the rest of their design courses. So it's not something they just do once, understand maybe, and drop. It's something they have to keep doing over and over again. And that reinforcement, I think, is really important to the values of the program, as well as their truly their knowledge and understanding of what the impacts are and how they can use them throughout their career. It really sets them up for their future. In this case, also, we have them do stakeholder analysis. So it's these three tools: a stakeholder analysis, this other framework for the social and cultural and financial impacts, and then Sustainable Minds LCA together sort of support our philosophy and our approach to sustainability. So they're looking at value and how it is exchanged, and different kinds of value, how it's exchanged among the various stakeholders for this product and the company that creates it. And they're looking for opportunities to add or change value from this perspective. So Sustainable Minds is a integral part of how we teach our students to understand essentially value in the world from a business perspective as well as from a design perspective. Now, the students have a lot of fun with this. They get very frustrated. Like I said, often the companies won't even talk to them, or they don't have the data themselves. And really, that's one of the key learnings we want them to understand. This is not easy. The trade-offs and the balances that Anne-Marie showed from her students between, CO2 and carcinogens, this is the everyday reality. And one of the reasons why we aren't seeing better, more sustainable products out there is because it is difficult, and they really don't understand how difficult it is until they try it themselves. It's okay that they're interpreting a lot, especially with the non-LCA tools. The fact that they're looking at and trying to understand products and services from these perspectives right off the bat is valuable because they've never been exposed to it at all. So the more quantitative as well as qualitative their understanding gets, the better they're prepared to be a successful professional. But it's okay that, they're starting off and they recognize that there's a little bit of wiggle, and more than a little bit of wiggle room right now, because we don't necessarily have all the tools that we need. They understand that the packaging has a huge impact sometimes. Like last semester, we had a product that a team looked at where the packaging ended up being a higher impact than the product itself. It was a pair of shoes. That was a huge revelation for them, as well as me too. They understand that, as product designers, they're not in charge of the batteries and the electronics and the circuit boards, but those pieces have a much bigger impact than the things that they are responsible for designing. And that, like I said, both inspires them and frustrates them. And it's important for them to understand it and then see it laid out in front of them. As far as the learning of our faculty and of our program, we found nothing better than Sustainable Minds as an LCA tool. And to be honest, LCA is how you settle the disagreements about whether a product is or isn't better. A few years ago, there was a study that came out and said that Hummer is better for the environment than a Prius. And of course, that was very controversial. LCA is the way you settle those kinds of disagreements. They get really frustrated, but we think that frustration can really fuel their learning, and we use it to our advantage, basically. They also get really depressed when they find out what impact we are all having in the world and how hard it is to reduce those impacts. And then their emotional journey looks something like this. They come in with somewhat high expectations. They get really, they get sad and depressed, to tell you the truth, going through this process. And it's not until they have an assignment to design a new product or a new system or a new service that they pull out of that sort of depression. And in fact, they end the class with a much higher level of satisfaction and happiness and sort of sense of accomplishment than they would have, not having gone through this process. But that ability to take what they've learned and apply it to something that they can design themselves is an integral part of the class and the arc of the program, and helping them understand that they can in fact have impact in the world. And these are some examples of some of the things that they've designed in that second product, their semester project. This is a city street level recycling program or recycling containers. This is one of my favorites. It's actually it's an oyster farm. So for people who live by the water or on a dock or in a maybe a planned community where there's water, they can grow their own oysters the same way someone might have an heirloom garden or grow their own wine in their own vineyards, etc. So it's sort of a marine version of that. And all of these products are then evaluated through this process by using the Sustainable Minds tool again. Here's a view of it installed. So some of the trends we're looking at, this has been a really successful integration and part of our curriculum in the school. It's currently limited to the industrial design program as well as the MBA program, and we're looking at now taking parts of these learnings and integrating it not just into the rest of the design program, but into the rest of the school as a whole. I'm a big believer that if we give the faculty a little bit of training, that this product evaluation project, this 4-week thing at the beginning, every student at CCA should have that experience. Even if they're not going to be responsible for designing products in their careers, they all buy stuff, they all use stuff, we all do. And this is the kind of perspective changing experience that helps them figure out how to be a better person in the world, not just a more successful professional. Lastly, we don't believe that sustainability is a fad at all. We think it's a vital component to how people, how professionals especially, are going to make decisions in their lives, whether they're an engineer or a designer or some other kind of developer, or whether they're purely on the business side making cost-benefit analyses and comparisons about the kinds of products their companies should be making and the kinds of services that they should offer. I will reiterate that, you know, as great as the Sustainable Minds tool is for the LCA, the ecological side, we have really pale tools in comparison for analyzing the social and cultural and financial impacts of these products and services too. These experiences sort of change our students' perspective on their careers, on the way that they can impact the world, and certainly their experiences here. And it makes them better students and it makes them better citizens. With that, I will conclude. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nathan. And thank you, Anne-Marie. Every time we do one of these webinars, I'm really so impressed at how each educator makes this learning process their own, and they're as engaged in it themselves personally as the students are. And I'm really gratified to be able to support this trend in the world. And I should also share personally, Nathan and I have been friends and colleagues for over 20-something years, and we have had somewhat parallel careers early on, both having been information designers and then getting involved in designing internet businesses in the 90s, and then we didn't talk for a while, and then we both found out we had transitioned into the sustainability space in the early 2000s, and so in a way we're continuing on this journey together, that we've been able to bring this tool to the marketplace, and Nathan has been able to utilize it to continue his work, and so it's exciting, and I'm really honored to have both of you on today to share your experiences and your journey. But to wrap it up, I think it's important. Nobody in this presentation talked about, and I'm using air quotes, doing the right thing. This is not about doing the right thing for the undefined end game of what is the right thing. This is all about preparing people to go out into the workplace and have a productive contribution to the workplace, the marketplace, and the economy. And that schools, like any other business, they're looking to attract students. That's their revenue. And those schools that get the reputation of enabling schools to come recruit or that students get hired easily out of those schools. That's going to attract more students to your schools, and essentially manufacturers will get better equipped students to take those important roles in product development and manufacturing. I wanted to, again, just to wrap up, the software is really easy to use. A lot of times educators who want to consider using it will have a little bit of reticence. Well, how long will it take students to learn it? How long will it take me to learn it? And I think both Anne-Marie and Nathan touched on that they're really, the learning curve is almost non-existent. It's super easy to use, and we've provided a ton of getting started tools and the Learning Center and kind of just-in-time learning on each screen. And because it's in the cloud, you can collaborate. And what we've really strived to do is make it affordable, because early on we said if you're going to ask people to work differently, then it can't be expensive. It has to be priced in a way that makes it okay to get started and use it. And so for industry, an annual subscription is $1,400 a year. For education, it's $350 a year for an educator and $49 for 6 months for each student, which is less than the cost of a textbook. And not only then are you getting a textbook in the Learning Center, but you're getting this hands-on learning experience. And further, we created quantity discount programs for educators and administrators who are looking, and Nathan touched on that, to, if they're using it in a class, then they can expand it to use in several courses in a program, and even further expand it to many courses in a program, or even in a whole college. And so we have different schools looking at using different quantities, and we deploy the subscriptions in ways that make it easy for the schools to manage and utilize themselves. Now, this webinar is recorded, and it will be added to the webcast series recordings page. You'll be able to listen to it in the next couple days or refer it to your colleagues. But I encourage you to go to this page and look at the webcasts we've had in the past. You can see the title, the participants, the schools, the key topics, and then you can click right in and listen to the replays. A lot of great teaching ideas here. And that really brings us to the end of the presentation. I think some of the questions we probably already touched on, and I want to add, Nathan, do you want to just mention the open source syllabus that you have?
Yeah, I should have. So we've tried to open source some of the syllabus from the DMBA program. We've got three different courses, studio courses up there. The first of which is this sustainability studio. I have to admit that the syllabus is about 5 or 6 years old at this point, but anyone that wants to try to do this, there's a ready-made syllabus in a studio context with a bunch of articles and everything's sort of there for someone to do a semester course in sustainable and social impact, and you can download it from the Design MBA site at cca.edu.
And notice Nathan put that in the chat window so that everyone can see it. We also have curriculum that other educators have contributed. So if you're looking for project ideas and curriculum that may be relevant to your school, talk to us about that. But we're at the top of the hour, and I want to thank you all for sharing your time with us today. There are a few questions that we're going to ask you to respond to on your way out, if you don't mind, and we'll be in touch. So thank you, Nathan and Anne-Marie, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you very much.